Hi everyone from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. My name is Janet Herron and I am an Alumni Engagement Officer at Memorial and your host for today's event, which is also happening during Memorial's annual Research Week. We hope you are all well and safe as we start to see some light at the end of this long pandemic tunnel. I'm here with Dr. Scott Harding, an academic staff member in the Faculty of Sciences Biochemistry Department and a Memorial alumnus himself, B.Sc 98, M.Sc 03, joining us from his home office. And we're also here with alumni and coffee expert Rob Collins, B.Sc 87 and B.A 88, who has over 20 years in the coffee business, and he is joining us from his kitchen. Now, I know those of you who are watching can't see who else is in the room for this event, but we have a lot of people coming on the call on the event all the time. We have over 162 registrants, which is awesome, and more are joining every second. And we're just delighted about that. So we will begin today's event, as always, with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. At the Office of Alumni Engagement, we are focused on offering many ways for you to connect with Memorial from anywhere in the world. And we're working diligently to create opportunities such as this to celebrate, socialize, mentor, learn, and advance both your career and improve your life. MUNalum 101 was born out of the need to reach out to alumni during the height of the pandemic and has since evolved to become a cornerstone of our alumni engagement activities, offering the latest information on key topics from Memorial University's own experts. Embarking on new and exciting ways to build relationships within our Memorial family of over 100,000 members is vital to our evolution as an institution. Alumni are the drivers of economic, social, and cultural development across the province and beyond. So please consider getting involved with our programming. You can be a mentor with 10,000 coffee, discover opportunities to meet up with expats through Global NL, and our online book club Coastlines features a stellar selection of Newfoundland and Labrador authors. So you can find more details on all of these programs on our website, www.mun.ca/alumni. Thank you so much for joining us today for our discussion about coffee, because like many of you out there, I don't know how I personally would have gotten through university without it. So just a few housekeeping issues. We will follow the presentations with a brief Q&A. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A function, which you will find at the bottom right of your screen. So please try to keep your questions short and post questions as soon as possible. Try not to leave them to the last minute. You are not, as attendees, you are not able to unmute your microphone or turn on your video. And you won't be able to see other people's messages in the chat, but you are not alone. And if you do post in the chat, please use the everyone option rather than sending a comment or question to a specific panelist, so we can be sure that everyone sees the questions. We are streaming live, but we're also recording this session, and you will be receiving a link to the event in a follow-up email. So it is my great pleasure to officially introduce the first of our special guests today. Dr. Scott Harding is an assistant professor in nutritional biochemistry at Memorial University. His research aims to better understand how and why certain foods, dietary patterns, and lifestyle choices promote health, while others promote disease development. Dr. Harding completed his PhD in human nutrition at McGill University and did postdoctoral training at the University of Manitoba and Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. He has held academic faculty positions at King's College London and at Memorial University. Now I'm going to pass the presenter ball to Dr. Harding, and he is going to share his screen and start the presentation.
Thank you, Janet. I think everybody can see my screen now. Thumbs up on that, Janet, if you can see everything. Rob? Yeah, okay.
Good.
Thanks everybody for the opportunity to speak to you today about something near and dear to my heart, coffee. I don't start my day without it, that's for sure. And I can't talk about coffee without talking about some of the chemistry in there, the biochemistry, and that's particularly about one of its main ingredients, caffeine. And so we'll get into a little bit of that in a second. Here on the right of the slide that you're seeing is a little cover art that I pulled out of a book I found published in 1922. And the title of that book says it all. They're all about coffee, and it's showing you the plant and this sort of thing. So as you'll see in some of the slides that we go through, coffee has been a part of civilization for probably a lot longer than a lot of people think. Okay. So let's first start with coffee as the food. My research doesn't really focus specifically on coffee in the sense that I'm a coffee expert in the lab, let's say, but I do focus on it from the perspective of its contribution to our diets and how much coffee we consume, or coffee type beverages, I should say as well. Because how you prepare your coffee, which I'll leave to Rob to describe how to do it in the perfect way later. But a lot of people consume coffee type beverages, and they contribute more recently to high calorie intake from all the added bits and pieces we put in there, like sugars and milks and other additives. But coffee actually has a personal meaning to a lot of people for different reasons. So some, it's the first thing they do in the morning when they get up. They once they're out of the bed, they get that coffee going. Other people use it for, believe it or not, for performance enhancement in terms of sport or performance, whether that be actively, gym workout or training, but it can also be from the perspective of mental acuity as well, because it is a bit of a stimulant. And we'll talk about that in a second. For some people, it just feels good. That cup of warm, hot coffee in your hand to start the day is really, get you off on a good start. And then others take it for the health benefits, which there are a lot of health benefits related to coffee that we know about now. And these are some of the chemicals that you can find in coffee separate from the caffeine, even known as phytochemicals, phyto meaning from plants. And these chemicals tend to have health benefits as well. So for any of the chemists, alumni in the audience, I'll do a little bit of chemistry here just to please you. Caffeine is the main ingredient that people recognize when they think of coffee. If you ask somebody what's in a black coffee, people are automatically probably going to say caffeine. Not everybody knows much beyond that, but caffeine is part of a class of chemicals called methylxanthines. And methylxanthines are commonly found, or xanthines in general, are commonly found in all biological fluids of humans and mammals. Caffeine is found in more than just coffee beans. It's found naturally in a number of different foods that are consumed regularly, and obviously in beverages, such as coffee-containing beverages. But caffeine is also added to foods and beverages that do not naturally contain it. And I'm sure some people appreciate some of those drinks as well. So these would be your energy drinks like Red Bull and these sorts of things, as well as colas and other soft drinks. Caffeine, if you didn't know, you're probably one of the few who didn't, is a central nervous system stimulant. People take it to wake themselves up. You see an old police movie from back in the 1970s, and when they were trying to sober up a witness, they'd pour coffee into them as fast as they could. And the idea was it was a stimulant. It would wake you up and keep you awake. If you were wondering how it actually stimulates, well, what it does is it keeps neurons firing when they should not be firing. It's a non-selective inhibitor of the adenosine 1 and 2A receptors. And what that does is it once neurons are firing, they usually stop firing naturally. And what this does is the caffeine blocks the receptor and stops it from being turned off. So basically, caffeine is a drug, except it's a socially and legally acceptable drug that everybody is very happy with. And I got a slide at the very end to show you that if you don't believe it's a drug, well, researchers at NASA do, and they've actually tested it in that context. And caffeine, though, is a safe compound to consume at low to moderate intakes on a daily basis. And that's not just coming from me, that's coming from extensive study by various jurisdictions, health organizations, and in Canada, that would be Health Canada. Caffeine will also, in terms of its health benefits or benefits in general, can lead to improved performance in certain tasks. For athletes, it's very interesting because there's been a number of studies done showing that caffeine consumption will actually reduce an athlete's perception of fatigue. And that's really important for some athletes because it allows them to exercise longer and harder or train longer and harder than they would without the stimulation of the caffeine. And for what is going to be a stressful time for a lot of our students who are not presently alumni, like the bunch that's joined us today, but the soon-to-be alumni, they have exams coming up soon, and they will probably benefit from caffeine stimulation effects for increased heightened of awareness and alertness and attention. In fact, the stimulatory properties of caffeine have also started to show promise as an adjuvant therapy to diseases like Parkinson's disease, so neurological type diseases. So again, back for the chemists and the biochemists who want to see some structures, here is the structure of xanthine, which I told you about. This is commonly found in all of our bodies and tissues, and it's naturally occurring and naturally present. And here you can see the structure of caffeine, which in place of these 3 hydrogens you see here, it has 3 methyl groups here. And it's called if you want to get really technical, it's a 1,3,7 trimethylpurine 2,6-dione. And the dione comes from these double bonded oxygens that you see here on the ring structure. Caffeine does not have to be included on any food label, strangely enough. And even though everything I've said points towards it being a drug or something that could be used for stimulatory effects and the sort of things, it's not required to be on a food label. However, it's very hard to find a caffeinated product that doesn't advertise its caffeine content because it's a selling factor for most people. And so if you look here, what I've listed here is what most regulatory jurisdictions who regulate nutrients or make recommendations about nutrients in the human diet. This shows you what a low caffeine intake would be, a moderate caffeine intake, and a high caffeine intake. And I'm showing you this because my next couple of slides show you some common beverages that you probably consume on an everyday regular basis that contain caffeine. You can kind of see them where you fit in terms of your caffeine intake. So remember, the high number is anything greater than 400, and a low caffeine intake is anything less than 200. So if you are a frequenter of a certain coffee chain and recognize these sizings, the Venti or the Grande, you are in one of these brewed coffees, you are very close to the upper side of the caffeine intake per day. If you look at something like home brewed or espresso, so when Rob starts his piece, you're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of about 150 milligrams of caffeine per cup. And then as you work your way down, you can see some of these other beverages, which you may or may not be familiar with. I've got an American reference here because this data came from an American textbook. But this is the FDA official limit for caffeinated soft drinks, which is 71 milligrams per day. So you can see there's quite a wide range. And in particular, if you look at the coffees, depending on how or where you get your coffee from, not all coffees are created equal in the context of their caffeine intake or caffeine content. Then if you shift away from the coffee or the hot beverages, you can see that you can find caffeine in a number of other beverages. Things like some sodas like Mountain Dew, Pepsi Zero, various energy drinks. These all are sold on the basis of their energy providing caffeine and content and sorts of things. So it's part of their marketing strategy. You can even buy energy bars now that contain caffeine. And this is, again, appealing to that sports industry that I mentioned earlier, where you get the stimulatory effects. And if you don't like coffee, don't be left out. And if you don't like teas either, you can get your caffeine from your chocolate. It's just you got to eat a lot more of it. I'm not recommending you do that, but at least you know you can get some caffeine in that kind of area as well. So that's about all the chemistry, the biochemistry I'm going to mention, because I know everybody's eating lunch and everybody wants to zero in on it for too long. But I'd like to pull in some more information about coffee just to give you some of the, I guess, the historical context of coffee as a food in our diet. Um, like I said, you'd be surprised at how early it appears in in historical record as a food. And if you think about coffee now in the context of how it's permeated through our everyday life, it's an amazing story about the success of a singular bean or fruit that grows on a tree or originally started growing on a tree in a very specific part of the world. So, what is the origin story of coffee? Um, if you, it's kind of staggering when you think that coffee is actually traded around the world as a commodity that's in the same tier as oil and gas. Okay, so we hear a lot about oil and gas lately, climate change, all these sorts of things, and its contribution to the economies of all around the world. And coffee is in that tier of commodities. So that should tell you how extremely valuable and important it is to global commerce, as well as just think about the farming, the shipping, the preparation, the wholesale, and the retail networks that are required globally to be able to have this food on demand pretty much on every corner of most cities in the developed world. But how did this all start? There's a number of origin stories and origin theories related to coffee. One of the probably more common, most of you might have heard of this, is the Ethiopian or Yemeni, depending on who you ask, story of the goat herder or farmer Kaldi. Kaldi noticed that when his goats consumed the berries of a coffee shrub, that they pepped up and were full of energy. And he would tell people, I assume, and spread the word about this, and probably collected coffee berries and passed them around to people to try. And this eventually caught on. And back in this time frame, this is Middle Ages we're talking here. So uh, this energy pep caught the attention of various monks in their monasteries who would have a hard time staying awake for prayers and study. And so when they realized the energy inducing effects of these coffee beans, they started consuming them so they could improve their alertness during prayers and study time. Origin theory 2 and 3 are not as catchy, let's say, as the Chaldean and the goat herding story, but it's in the record, and you can see that several countries, but nothing specific outside the areas of Africa or Middle East, claim kind of credit for the development of coffee as a food. There's no specific person related to this idea, but there's record of the beans or the fruit of the coffee tree or the coffee shrub being mixed with animal fats and then used as a bar, an energy type bar for people to consume. So think of it in terms of a food preservation kind of perspective. And then there's also a record of people using the pulp of the beans. So smashing the fruit. So this is not roasting it, this is the raw fruit. And then fermenting it and making an alcoholic beverage out of it. And we see the same thing for cocoa in around the same time frame. So again, this is Middle Ages. And then theory number 3 is very similar, but this is where we bring in, again, the idea of roasting the beans. So various cultures started roasting the beans and making beverages from them. Now, it may have started as a whole bean soaking of the, roast and soak the whole bean in water, but it may have followed into grinding, and the roasting may have been a process for food preservation. We don't know. But either way, it's a global phenomena, and you see the word coffee in many different languages around the world very early on in the development of these languages, in particular Yemeni and Turkish, but you see it in European languages as well, like Dutch. It was a major trading commodity in the Middle East up until the 1600s, and the Turkish monopoly on it kind of ended around the 1600s because up until that point, no fertile beans or live plants were allowed to leave the Middle East until an African pilgrim named Baba Budan smuggled some out of the city of Mecca, and this led to European attempts at growing coffee. And this is where you start to see the boom around the world, because colonialism in Europe was starting to emerge, and countries around the world were being conquered by European powers. And this is where you see the Dutch starting to grow their coffee. And so now you start to see the locations of where you probably like your favorite beans coming from appearing in the historical records. So Sri Lanka, Ceylon, and Java. The French tried it in the Caribbean, the Spanish in Central America, the Portuguese in Brazil. And then by the 1700s, most of the Americas were drinking coffee on a regular basis. And then later in subsequent centuries, you see it really taking off, partly as the protest against the British, when, the Boston Tea Party type of things. And then you kind of slide into the whole gold rush out west, and cowboys drinking coffee being their favorite morning beverage to consume. And this is where these big names in coffee have kind of originated, the Folgers, Maxwell House, and Hill Brothers. That takes me to a little bit more about the coffee house. So I'll finish on this, and then that is a perfect point for Rob to take up what he's going to tell you about. But the coffee house is not a new thing, even though it might feel like a new thing when you see these new cafes popping up around. But this is a picture over here on the right-hand side of Richter's Coffee House in Leipzig, Germany. This is the 17th century, and it looks like a pretty popular spot to hang out. And there's historical records. So this is a picture on the top right-hand corner here of a plaque in London on the Jamaica Wine House. And this is where the first coffee house stood in London. So this dates back to 1652. And over here on the left-hand side, this is from Paca Rose's coffee house. And you can see his actual, the bill that he would have produced, probably paid a lot of money to get this printed off in the time, describing all the benefits of coffee and all the things that it would cure. And here's a little excerpt that I put right here. F and S's were kind of flipped around back in those days in the spelling. They didn't have spell check like we have nowadays. So it would cure everything from eyesores and coughs and colds and rheumies, consumption, headaches, dropsy, which I don't know what that is, gout, scurvy, and king's evil, which sounds probably worse than dropsy. These coffee houses also became very popular and became known as the penny universities. So what we associate with probably the idea of people going for a drink in the pub and that sort of thing after work, in this time frame, because coffee was so popular in London, it was actually the coffee houses, which is where all the people would kind of drop in after their long work shifts, and they pay their 1 cent entrance fee and then pay 1 to 2 cents for a drink of coffee, for a cup of coffee, and they start to debate the philosophies and the rules and the laws that were going on at the time. It's also thought that this is where the concept of tipping originated in the coffee houses. So a lot of these coffee houses had a box on the bar or the tables, which would have a sign on them that said, to ensure promptness, you put a little extra money in those boxes, and hence the TIP for the tip. This is a coffee house which I've actually bought coffee in. This Starbucks over here, this is right next to Covent Garden in London. And I've had coffee from this coffee house, and I didn't realize until I started preparing this lecture for a course that we teach in biochemistry 1600, Foods, Drugs, in Your Body. But this is actually one of the original coffee houses in London. This dates back to 1713, and this is where the Lion's Head Coffee House stood. And one of the original founders of another Guardian newspaper in London, not the current one, would have the Lion's Head present, and you could put whatever comments you wanted into the Lion's Head, and he would basically, as a publisher, decide what to publish. And usually it was things against the king or the ruling monarch at the time. Here, sorry, the share screen option is there, and I don't know how to get it to go back up. Oh, there we go. It's going away on its own. Charles II had no love affair of coffee. Charles II was very upset by the fact that these coffee houses were popping up in popularity and becoming known as these penny universities. And so he issued a decree, a royal decree, that outlawed coffee houses in around 1675. And it was because of all the diverse, false, and malicious and scandalous reports that were coming out of these coffee houses against and defaming His Majesty's government. And they were disturbances of the quiet and the peace of the realm at the time. And so he wanted the owners and proprietors of coffee houses to submit to the severest punishments that the law may inflict upon them if they continued serving this beverage. This was actually instituted in December 1675, and if my research is correct, it was repealed in January of 1676. So it wasn't a long-lasting law on the books. I think a revolt would have come around if it had to stay on the books. And then my last slide is just going to show you, to drill home the fact that caffeine is studied in many different ways. So you can align yourself with whichever spider in this particular set of data I'm showing you. This is by no way saying that this is actually what you would get in humans, but some researchers publishing in NASA Tech Briefs basically dosed house spiders with either marijuana, benzodrine, caffeine, or chlorohydrate, and then looked at what kind of webs they spun. And so caffeine is clearly somebody was in a rush and very hasty when they were designing their web over here. So it's kind of interesting to see it. And this is the control. This is what a normal house spider would have spun. So I'll leave you to make your own conclusions on the effects of caffeine, at least in spiders. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to Rob. Sorry, I did have that on 14 minutes, but I went a little bit over. I apologize, but I'll turn it over to Rob now.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to Rob in 1 second. I'm just going to get rid of this slide so we can see him well. Thank you so much, Scott. And here we go. So, and people can try putting their layout in stack, and then I think Rob will be the biggest one on there. They can play around with that, but or grid or side by side. So Rob Collins has been, and I gotta, yep, everyone is good. Rob Collins has been in the cafe business for over 20 years, most notably as owner-operator of Hava Coffee House and Espresso Bar. He also has an online training business called Espresso at Home that focuses on how to make better espresso at home by choosing the right bean, understanding the equipment, and using proper technique. So Rob is going to give us a little primer on that right now.
Can you hear me, everyone? Scott, thanks for that. That was awesome. Very entertaining. I was wishing to go on a little bit further because a lot of that stuff I'd never heard of before. But anyways, thanks, Janet, and thanks for everybody for tuning in. Like Janet said, I'm going to try to put some of the stuff that Scott talked about and actually put it to how you use it every day. And I'm glad that Scott mentioned about caffeine because there's two questions that I've been asked over and over and over again. What coffee has the most caffeine in it, Rob? Is it light or dark roast? And particularly around COVID time, which really accentuated it, everybody has got all this gear in their homes. And they always come up to me and said, man, I never use it. I said, what do you mean you never use it? I just don't, it's just too much trouble. It's too hard. It just blows me away because it's so easy to make cafe quality stuff at home if you want. I'm not saying don't go out to cafes and stuff like that, but particularly, and the reason why I did the little course and what I'm going to show you today is about a 10-minute version of a 90-minute class. I'm going to try to put all this together, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a drink from start to finish and show you some tips that's going to help you use your machine. If you don't have a machine, also this might be good tips for you on what to look for if you're going to get into it. So what I want you to get out of my session is three things. The grinder is the most important part of all this. There's a thing called brew ratio. And when you're steaming milk, it's all about the stretch. So I'm going to hit all those and I'm going to come back to them all the way along. So before I start making a drink, I'm just going to quickly go over the gear. Espresso machine. This is a Breville Cafe Roma. I have no allegiance to any type of gear manufacturer, but this is sort of a standard home machine. This is a boiler machine, very super duper fancy and all that kind of stuff. But if this guy breaks, it's a big problem. This guy breaks, it's $175. So, but to its credit, this is our second one. Our other one was 10 years old and it was on all day, every day for 10 years. This goes on maybe once a week. So with that, you also need a steaming pitcher. I'm going to leave the grinder for a second because we're going to go back to that. And a tamper. And for those of you who have no idea what espresso is, I'm going to explain it to you. Espresso is taking near boiling water and forcing it through finely ground coffee under pressure to create a concentrated coffee beverage, high in caffeine, very complex flavor and stuff like that, but you can play with the flavor of it based on your own palate. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to sort of jump right into actually making a drink. So the first and foremost thing is, like I said before, and the first of the three is the grinder. If you're ever going to spend any money on any coffee equipment, this is it. And this is a burr grinder. I won't get into the inner workings of all that, but the best ones are stainless steel burrs. And there's two types. There's a plate one and a conical burr grinder. You can check it online if you want, but this is the key to the whole thing. And I've got it set up, so I'm just going to try to show you if I can. The basic setup grind for an espresso machine, and I don't know if you can see this, it's probably between flour and kosher salt in setup. And if you push it together, it'll actually hold form. Okay, so that's a good start when you're starting out. Bear with me for a second. So we've got the grind sorted out. If you don't have a grinder, don't lose your mind. Don't, if you have another style grinder, non-burr grinder, go to one of your local coffee shops and have them grind some stuff up for you. If you're having trouble with your machine, it's related to this, so you don't have to have one tomorrow, but highly recommend you invest in one. The next part is the espresso machine, and there's two sort of components. I'll go over the components of the machine. There's a water reservoir, the brew head, and part of the brew head is what's called a portafilter or handle, and inside it, it's got a little basket and a steam wand. Need a tamper for compressing the coffee because we're doing forcing finely ground coffee under pressure. I talked about the steaming pitcher, and what I'm going to do is now actually do a shot for you and show you what I'll get into. The next part of it is the whole concept of brew ratio. So bear with me for a second. It seems faster when you're by yourself. Okay. This portafilter is a 50 millimeter. What it takes is 15 grams of coffee in a double basket. So we come to part two of the takeaways. I want you to understand a thing called brew ratio. And what you want to do is you want to attempt to find a 1-to-2 brew ratio. What that means, 15 grams in here by weight, 30 grams in the cup by weight. What that really means is 2 tablespoons here will yield 2 ounces here. So all you got to remember is 2 tablespoons. What I do is initially I use this amount of pressure just to compact the beans, the grinds, and then I give it some real pressure, about 30 pounds, but your weight moved forward. And what I want to do is just basically compact the coffee. So 2 tablespoons. I want to yield 2 ounces in the cup in 20 to 25 seconds. If you accomplish that, you will come up with this lovely complex beverage.
Yeah.
And you'll see it's sort of shimmering like a Guinness. So what we've got going on here is the emulsified coffee oils, the soluble solids, the caffeine, the sugar, the protein. And what that is, it's a little over, my machine is not perfectly dialed in, but it's a little over 2 ounces. So again, the key to all this is that 2 tablespoons in the portafilter to 2 ounces in the cup over 20 seconds. That will represent your coffee well. That'll tell you the taste profile and give you the taste profile you're looking for. So with that sorted out, that's part 2, the brew ratio. Part 3 that everybody's asked me about is steaming milk. How do I get it to look like in the cafe and it tastes good and it doesn't look like this piece of styrofoam or it's just flat and hot milk? And here's the key to it. It's got nothing to do with the fat content of the milk. There's protein in milk. When protein is cold, it's bound like this. As you warm the protein, it opens up and it grabs oxygen and creates little tiny bubbles that make that lovely emulsification. But the trouble is, you've got to get air into the milk. So how do you do that? You get your steam wand going, pretending my hand is the surface of the milk. I want to take the steam wand and I want to just break the surface. When I turn on the steam wand, I'm going to drive heat and I'm going to create a vacuum and bring oxygen in. The only way to get foam or texturized, really tasty milk is to bring oxygen in it. And the only way to do it is for the first, until the milk turns from cold to warm, you want to have the steam wand just below the surface of the milk. And then after that, you want to plunge the wand and just heat it up to the temperature that you need. I don't have the time to do it right now. Probably during the Q&A, I can do it for you. But basically, we would fill the jug to the halfway point, might be able to do it the whole way. But the next thing I would do would be turn on my steam wand function of my espresso machine, give it a minute or two to actually get up to speed. And it actually works like a machine that you'll find in a cafe. It will really, really pump out the steam. When I do that, again, what I would do is I would take the steam wand, just break the surface of the milk, and I would do what's called stretching it. I would create the vacuum and just put the steam wand right at the surface of the milk to push the steam in, create a vacuum to bring in air. And what that will do is that from the point of 4 degrees, which is cold milk, to about, I don't know, roughly 100 degrees, which is body temperature, that's where the protein will unravel and grab the air bubbles. After that, once it's just warm to the touch, spend the rest of the time just holding on to the pitcher until it's warm enough so you can have a lovely drink, and then you basically pour it up. You've got a little, this would be a 10-ounce cappuccino. So I know it's a lot to cover. It's like I said, I'm trying to do 10 minutes, a 90-minute session in 10 minutes, but basically what we covered is the grinder is the most important part. It offers you the ability to adjust your grind, to adjust the amount of coffee, and for the taste profile. Too little, it's way too robust. More, if you have more in the cup, it's really acidic and sort of really soured. The next part is brew ratio. Remember, 2 tablespoons to 2 ounces in the cup over 20 to 25 seconds. And when you're trying to steam milk, you have to stretch it first. I mean, you've got to get some air into the milk mixture or it simply will not work. You're just heating up milk. So that's pretty much all my stuff.
Great. That's awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Rob. Just 1 second. We're going to go to questions now. And hold on 1 sec, because I like to put up my question slide so we know what we're doing. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was wonderful. And now we do have some questions coming in. First question is, hold on. Will almond milk work the same way when you're steaming it?
Yes.
There's a question for Rob. Yeah.
Absolutely. If it was me, and I'm just being straight up there, the 2 best out there are almond, but a better one again for taste. And I guess different brands differ, but oat milk by far has pretty much eclipsed every other one from pure taste. Now, I'm a dairy drinker, so I find the transition between the two. I will go back and forth between oat milk and dairy all the time. But most people who prefer milk substitutes to dairy are finding that definitely almond, and it does steam the same way. There's a few good, better brands out there. There's a barista brand out there. I don't know if it really makes a big difference, but sorry, I gotta keep my answers more truncated. Yes, almond is perfect. I'd highly recommend you try oat milk too if you haven't.
Great. And isn't oat
Works
milk
the same.
better, like from an environmental sustainability perspective? That's what I've read.
There's a little bit of conflicting stuff there. Oat milk and almond milk are pretty much neck and neck from the point of view of water they require to produce. If I went any further than that, I'd be talking out of my derriere. I really just don't know it that well, but it's significantly better than soy.
Okay.
The almond and oat milk, from my understanding.
Okay, here's a question for Scott. Someone wants to know, can you create a decaf tea by pouring some water on it and then dumping the initial amount?
Yeah, the process of decaffeination, it does involve the water, you're right, and it does involve extracting out the caffeine with the hot water. The problem is the process of decaffeinating either coffee beans or tea or these sorts of things is that you need the ability to get the caffeine out of that water that you just generated and take everything else and put it back inside the bean or back inside the coffee or the tea leaves that you're using. Because if you don't, you've lost all the good parts as well. So that's why that process of decaffeination, there's a couple of different ones. You've probably heard of the water or the direct, and then there's the Swiss technique. There's various techniques to do it, but they all involve removing more than just the caffeine, taking the caffeine out of that extract, and then putting all those other good bits back into the product. And if you don't do that, the flavor profile, the enjoyment of that beverage is going to suffer. Hope that answers the question.
Great. Here's a question for, I guess it's for Rob. It's from Rhonda. She wants to know, what is the best way to store your coffee beans?
Sorry, I'm trying to steam some milk here while we do this. For many, many years, I used to give my mom Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee for Christmas. And in July, I'd find it in her freezer on the shelf. And I always thought that was crazy. And, but there's some research out there that says you can do that. So realistically, airtight container, keep it out of direct sunlight and you're fine. You're great I tested it out for 3 years. I had coffee and just to see how far you could go without it, just about a year, airtight container out of sunlight and you're fine for a year. Perfect. But you can freeze it too, apparently.
I always thought you were supposed to freeze it.
Yeah, my mom was classic, right? She was a tea drinker. She just did it to humor me.
Now, Karen is asking, what are must-haves in an espresso machine?
Must-haves?
Mm-hmm.
You can have a stovetop espresso machine if you're just a hardcore, just espresso person. You can go with what's called an alpha. This is just like a mocha pot, okay? Again, I go back to dollars and stuff like that, and I probably should, but must-haves in these, the cheaper machines used to have thermoblocks, which are not boilers. Now, even the more expensive home machines have moved to the thermoblock technology. So the must-haves, they all pretty much come together as a unit. And a lot of the machines now come with a combined grinder and espresso machine. I really like those. Those are great. So the must-haves are obviously what this one has: water reservoir, or you can have it plumbed directly into your plumbing. With that, you can't move it. So I go with the reservoir one, brew head with portafilter and a steam one. I would get a machine what's called pitted. A pitted machine is you're available to adjust the steam pressure. But now you're starting to get up in price on machines. So, and that's when you get into a more nerdy conversation with me I can have with you at some other time. But must-haves are pretty much what these have. But you can just get a stovetop thing for, $75.
Yeah. Andrea is wondering how you get those pretty designs on the top of your cappuccino.
That takes, what is it? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Again, I could show you, but it'll take I'd have to, it's all about the pour. And basically, when you get your 2 ounces of espresso in a glass cup like that, maybe I can do it. No, I'd have to do another shot. I don't think we have time for that. What you want to do is you want to tilt your glass so you create a bigger pool.
15 minutes. We've got 15 minutes.
Okay, well, I can quickly try to do it because I think I got the milk steam. So I'm going to make some noise and I'm going to be quiet for a minute, which is hard for me. Excuse me.
Actually, Roger, can't even hear any of your noise. So someone was just commenting to me on a text message that you can't hear your grinder or your steamer.
So again, it's all about doing the shot correctly.
And
Just because you put more espresso in your cup doesn't mean that it's better. So just running water through it is not going to help the flavor. You want to do 15 grams to get 30 in your cup. You want 2 tablespoons in your double basket. And you want to run it for 20. I'm going to eyeball this one, guys and gals. So again, my machine is pretty well set up because if I don't have the crema on top is just not going to work. It's not going to taste like anything sensible because it's about the complexity and the balancing of oils, acids, sugars, and all that kind of stuff. Not my best to take the milk, but here's the way you pour it. You want to create a well. You want to take your pitcher, you want to pour it here, move up, and then sort of push down. So what you're doing is actually you're pushing out the more, I guess, the foam. And in this sort of flat white style, which is what I'm doing, there's no real concept of foam. It's a real emollients all the way through. Now this has been sitting for a bit, but basically this is how it works. So you want to pour like that, go like this, and then, and with the finish on the end, and pour through. So again, not my greatest attempt, but this would be your, I guess, latte size. Cappuccino, well, in Italy, they don't really drink a lot of it because they're drinking by 10 o'clock in the morning. But for the most part, a 8 to 10 ounce size drink is cappuccino. Latte is a little bit bigger with a little less foam on top. But to answer the question, the pour is basically like this. You want to create the well so that it's quite deep for the milk to get underneath. Pour steady, pull up, come down, and a little bit of wiggle on the end and pour through. Takes a bit of time, but I can show you with a little bit more time.
Okay. Now we've got a question for Scott from someone who missed a little bit of the presentation. She's just wondering, can you talk about, is there still caffeine in decaffeinated coffee? How does that work?
Yeah, there is a little. It's really probably decaf it's not no cap. So there is going to be some residual there, and it comes from two parts. One is that you didn't extract all the caffeine out in the decaffeination process, and then the other part, like in terms of coming from the bean into the water solution that they use, and then there's the other part of like removing the caffeine from that solution and then putting all those good bits back into the coffee. When that happens, a little bit of caffeine goes back as well. So it's never a no caffeine. I'm sure you could probably get ones that have like no detectable levels of caffeine, but generally off the shelf, your decaf is low cap. Now it's going to be really low cap, right? Because that caffeine is actually, that's a money making material for these companies, these coffee companies, because they sell that caffeine directly to like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola and these places, and that's where the caffeine comes from in those beverages, right? Because those beverages are completely processed foods, which are using ingredients like this. And if it's not those companies, it's going into like the energy bars and these sorts of things, right? So it's a valued product for both sides of it, both sides of the coin on the decaf side of things.
That's really interesting. So they can't create caffeine in a lab. You've got to get it from the coffee.
You could, but I think economically it's much cheaper, right? It's a waste product to some degree from one industry that another industry can utilize. So
And I mean, sometimes people have changed the way that they kind of process caffeine through their life. I mean, I know I found that myself. Is that a real thing, or is that just something that we think that we now can't process caffeine the same way we did when we were in our 20s? Is it like, I don't know.
I don't know about the processing part. You would the same amount. There'd be no reason why caffeine wouldn't get absorbed. So when you consume it, it would get into your body. You probably habituate to it though. So you either, or something else has changed in your physiology or your health or your just your routine that caffeine doesn't work as well. Like and sometimes that's kind of one of those gray areas of just life where you have little aspects of your life each contributing to the same factor that you're trying to fix. So if it's sleep or if it's energy, and then if you can't really pinpoint what you want to change to get the yield of results you want, you kind of start blaming one thing or another, and it's easy to blame things in your diet that you can't handle.
Another question for Rob. We've had a couple of questions about the grinder, and I know that you mentioned the name of the grinder, but can you tell people that again, and you can spell it out, and I'll write the name in the chat.
It's called a burr, B-U-R.
And also, what would you look for when purchasing a grinder? So a burr grinder, B-U-R-R?
B-U-R is a burr grinder.
Yeah.
And the benefits of them, And it's not only for espresso, you can have it, look, if you buy a burr grinder, you'll have it for the rest of your life because you can use it for whatever. What it does, it is really efficient and really precise on doing whatever grind you want. The ones you see in grocery stores are what's called corkscrew grinders. So if you've seen an ice auger, it's the same as that, but sideways, and all it does is it pulverizes. It can do a broad range, but it doesn't do any of them well. A burr grinder really does it really well. So it's 2 plates. For the plate style, it comes like this to pulverize, and the conical one, it's got like an auger that, or a sort of hemispherical auger that comes in and pulverizes it. But it's really sharp blades and really, really good at it. So there's lots of great brands out there. I'm not going to lie to you. This is an expensive grinder. It's 15 years old. I've been in the business forever, and I went out and got the stuff because I'm going to use it. Right? I've had this for a long time, but I bought once because I was at it. You don't need to go this far. You can get a burr grinder at Costco for $40, right? But it's not going to be a doser like this one. So what you're talking about, there's lots of great ones out there. You can go on Amazon and stuff like that. I know you can get some, I'm just trying to think of some of the brands. This is a Rancilio. Any of the Rancilios, Electra, I know that Breville actually puts out a decent one. Believe it or not, DeLonghi, they all put out, all you got to look for is stainless steel burrs. You'll get one for about $150 and you'll have it the rest of your life. Right? You don't need to get one tomorrow, but it's a great Christmas gift. Just saying. The hard to find with the supply chain stuff. I know, I get it. It just is so. But don't go blowing $700 on a grinder if you're not going to be knowing if you're going to use it. Get $100 one, and if you do, give it to your cousin, and you trade up. That's what I always try to say to people because they look at me. Oh yeah, you asked me to get this, told me to get this grinder, and I never use it. And I said, well, I told you. So, burr grinder, stainless steel blades, $150. You should be able to find one.
Don't cringe, Rob, but I've got a Black & Decker burr grinder.
Black & Decker's fine, same thing. Yes, absolutely.
The difference, I think, is though, there's a learning curve with the Black & Decker. You've got to figure out your grind by trial and error. Well, way more than with the one you have, right?
And that's sort of what I get into here too about the 20 seconds and the brew ratio. It requires you to spend some time with it, and also I haven't even got into the like people. It's only dark roast for espresso, right? No, it's whatever you like is your espresso. It doesn't got to be dark roast. That's why you get out there, experiment, get out to the coffee shops, get to some of the staff to recommend something to you, try some different stuff, right? I do it all the time, but I'm a nerd about it. So
we got a question from Rebecca, and she's wondering how finely should you grind coffee for a drip coffee maker?
In the range that you saw with what I had, remember when I talked about more like kosher salt? That's that's the grind you want because it's about contact with water. Okay, so if you really fine grind, it's only 20 seconds sitting in water. So you want more surface area, finer grind to get the coffee out of it. In a drip machine, you're going to be putting it in a couple of, I don't know, 4 or 5 tablespoons, and it's going to take 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to brew. Thus, you need a bigger surface area. It's going to be sitting there a little bit longer. So, like I said, you'll see if to eyeball it, more like kosher salt, really coarse, but you know, most grinders have a setting for drip coffee, mid-range.
Perfect. Well, I think we are pretty much getting to that time where we're running out of time. So I'm just going to pop up our end slide there. And I really want to, that went so quickly and we learned so much about coffee. And I just want to thank you both, Scott and Rob, for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. And do either one of you have any final words of wisdom on coffee for our audience?
I wanted to ask Scott a few more questions, but he and I'll get together for coffee and we'll go over that.
Yeah, I have more questions for you too. I'm gonna get the espresso machine soon, so
yeah,
we'll have to have it. Like you said, I will not buy it without speaking.
We'll have our own little session afterwards. So
great.
And that was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We've got lots of comments. We've got lots of comments from people saying thank you so much. Great presentation. So we really We really appreciate that. And thank you to everyone that came out and attended and for your great questions. Just want to remind everybody that if you enjoyed today's event, we have other events on our alumni website, including, which is a strange one or a kind of appropriate one to come after coffee, is next Tuesday, the 30th. We're going to be talking to Dr. Sheila Garland about her research on sleep. And on December the 7th, we're going to have a special holiday edition of MUNalum 101 with Dale Jarvis, who's going to be talking about Newfoundland and Labrador holiday traditions. And that's going to be fun. So this session has been recorded, and I'll be sharing a link in a follow-up email. So everyone keep your eyes on your inbox. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again. And that's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the invite, Janet. This was fun.
Thanks, Janet. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ciao.